Father God, we just thank you so much for what we've been exploring, engaging with over the last number of hours. Some really important stuff. I just pray for Patrick God in this last session now. We're so aware that the world is so broken, there's so much hurt and pain and suffering, but you are still Lord. And so help us to work out how we travel through those difficult seasons of life, how we support our congregations, how we make disciples, even when things don't always go according to plan. I pray for your blessing upon Patrick today as he shares. May you speak into our lives afresh. Empower him, I pray. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Andy. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you for that lovely surprise. And it's really good to be here, actually. I've known Andy for so many years, and I have so much admiration and respect for Andy. And I've known Mark for a bit as well, but for Andy, I've always felt that he's one of the most generous, compassionate leaders that I know, and holds a lot, actually. And we've been working together on this tour that he mentioned, the Overwhelmed tour. And it's been such a privilege just to put this together, because what we wanted to do with it is not just do something for churches, we really wanted to do something with churches. And so what we're going to try and do everywhere we go, we're going to invite civic leaders, we're going to invite local charities, we're going to interview local people about the local issues. We've got an amazing singer-songwriter writer coming from Ireland called Caitlin Kelly, so she'll be fantastic. There'll be interviews. And just to say, it is during Mental Health Awareness Week, and I sort of feel like in the church, if I'm really honest with you, I feel like in the last couple of years, we've gone a little bit backwards in our understanding of mental health. I feel like after COVID, we were really going for it, and we were really grappling with it. And just recently, there's just been some things I'm just thinking, you know what, we're in every community across this country. We've got so much that we can offer, and we've got to understand, got to get our theology right, we've got to get our understanding right, and we've got to be reaching out to people to provide community and care. So this is an amazing opportunity. And just to say, we have one date spare, which ironically is the 16th of May. So if there's any church who wants to host us on the 16th of May, that isn't a million miles away, because we're going to go up north in October, please chat to Andy or myself, because we would love to come and visit. Andy's going to host these as well, so that would be a fantastic time. Just wanted to mention one resource from the brilliant guys at St. Andrews is, I wrote this book called Brighter Days about a couple of years ago, and I wrote it because I was in my office, and like most Christian leaders, I have hundreds and hundreds of Christian books. And as I was looking around all my hundreds of Christian books, I came to the realization that I didn't have one book that I would give to one of my non-Christian friends. Not one. And I had some sort of evangelistic books, like The Cross and the Switchblade and that sort of stuff. But I wanted something that was written by a Christian that talked about health, mental, emotional, spiritual. I didn't want to leave out the faith bit, but I wanted it to be gentle in tone. I wanted something to give to the dads that I watch football with when my son plays football, or the mums at the school gates. And the other thing I realized was about 9 years ago now, I had a breakdown. Life just got too difficult, and everything started going wrong at once. And when I had my breakdown, everyone was trying to give me a book to read. And I couldn't even read a paragraph, not alone a book. Do you know what I mean? And so I was like, what would it look like for me to write something like no other book that I've ever read, to write it in short stories and practical tools, like if you can't get to sleep, what do you do, to write about what anxiety really feels like, and to write short stories, poems, all that sort of stuff, and to stick it in there, but to write it as a Christian, but for a very secular audience. And so we did it, and we put it out into the world, and we've just been blown away by the response. In the first week, I had a school ring me up, and the head teacher rang me up and said, "I'll take 150, please." And I was like, wow, that's a lot of copies. And she goes, yeah, we're going to give it to every single year 11 student, because we've had 3 attempted overdoses in year 11. And then she said, and it's not the kids that we're worried about, it's the parents. The parents don't know how to talk to their kids about mental health, because there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. And the challenge is we just lump the two together. And I don't know how your parents talk to you about mental health. I don't know if it was good or sketchy or non-existent. Hand up for non-existent. Just look around the room. Do you know what I mean? And so they said, what we're going to do is we're going to get you to come into school and talk to the whole of year 11 and the whole of the year 11's parents. And we're going to disguise it as an awards evening. So I gave out hundreds of certificates. I had no idea what they were for, but it was great. And then I had 500 people literally for an hour to talk about mental and emotional and spiritual health. And then I found out, I had a phone call from Lloyd's Bank actually, and they were talking about staff retention, because staff retention in a lot of places and is really poor because people burn out, because we don't understand this, because we have the language of it, but then we don't implement anything. So it's all right raising awareness, but if you don't implement anything, what's the point? And so they were like, would you come in and would you train all our staff? I had GPs starting to ask the same question. I found out that churches were giving them out in chemo and radiotherapy units, and hospitals were finding out about this, so we're starting to do the same. They started going in, people were leaving them in cafes, on buses. I started getting emails from literally everyone. I spoke at a think tank in Westminster, and this woman came up to me and she said, I'll have 100, please. And I said, that's a lot of copies. And she went, yeah, my 15-year-old son died by suicide 3 weeks ago. So at the funeral service, I'm going to give everyone a copy of your book, Brighter Days, and an order of service. And the book's based on a Chinese proverb that says this: it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. If there's ever a proverb for our time, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And just before Christmas, she rang me up and she said, Patrick, I've got 25 of them coming for Christmas dinner. Would you come and give a talk? And I was like, you know, when you feel like you can't really say no, it was definitely one of those gigs, and I did it, and it was hard, but it was worth doing. And so I would love you, obviously, to get a copy for yourself, but I would love it if you got a copy for someone that was struggling. You don't write books to make money, believe me. You write it because you want to make a difference into people's lives. Get it for someone that's going through a tough time, and hopefully it will start a really helpful but kind conversation. So about a year ago, I was having dinner with my wife and we were playing that game. I don't know if you ever play this with your partner or your friends. Who is the most exhausted game? And does anyone ever do that? And what you do is you do it because you want to prove that somehow you are more tired than your partner, because then you don't have to clear up after dinner. And so I was going through all the things that I had done that week. I said, I've had a pretty stressful week. I got successful funding bid in for a charity that I'm trying to help. That was good. And I've done 5 talks this week. 5 talks. That's taken it out of me. Some of them were like a couple of hours. You know, I've walked the dog every day this week. Always get that one in. And I've even taken the kids to the cinema. That was my trump card. And I fell asleep during the whole film, but we didn't mention that. And she just looked totally unimpressed. And I thought, what is wrong with this woman? Like, literally, like, I'm exhausted here. And then finally she went, that's all well and good, but at what cost? I was like, what? At what cost to you? To what cost to your health? To what cost to us when you're totally and utterly exhausted all the time? And it really challenged me. And I started to come across this guy called, I came across a guy called King Pyritus. And King Pyritus is an interesting guy because basically he rose to power in Greece in 306 BC. And he was the second cousin of Alexander the Great. And King Pyritus was known as someone that would fight many battles, but at great cost to his army. So in 279 BC, he sailed to Italy to face the Roman invaders. And despite winning the battle, he lost many people. His army used to come back exhausted, mentally and emotionally scarred. But then he'd go off for another battle, and then the same thing would happen. Eventually, King Pyritus died in obscurity. And we have this phrase, which you may have heard of before. It's called a Pyrrhetic victory. It means a victory, but at what cost? And I've come across so many leaders, if I'm honest, with amazing leaders who are winning the battle, but losing the war. They're exhausted. They're burnt out. Life is tough. Their kids are dying to actually see them. And if I'm really honest with you, I felt like Sometimes we've modeled a leadership style that has made status and exhaustion a bit of a status symbol. And we've got to do it differently. It's not sustainable. And I know for me, it's not sustainable. Here's some theoretic victories. If you just roll the slides on, if that's okay. It should be a couple of slides in. Oh yeah, forget that. That's great. That's me, yeah. Next one. There you go. Theoretic victories. You spin every plate to achieve the goals, but wind up anxious and exhausted. You get the degree, but in the process, burn out and graduate with no desire to go into the profession you're studying for. You work so hard to provide for your family, but spend so much time away from home that you miss your kids growing up. They have everything they need except you. You win the argument, but you lose the friend. You compromise to support your boss, but lose your integrity. You overwork trying to retire early, but damage your health so you can't enjoy it. You buy the car, the house, the car, the lifestyle and credit, but you can't sleep for fear of bailiffs appearing at your door. You keep up with a multitude of friends, but miss out on deeper connections and wind up lonely. You work hard to make everyone like you, then you realize you don't like yourself. Theoretic victories. And so often as leaders, we're always asked, aren't we, do more with less. Less money, less volunteers, live constantly stressed. And what I find is that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, which is meant to be a temporary state, is often become our permanent state. And our brains and our bodies are not designed to be constantly be like that. And sometimes, you come to conferences, even like this, how to make disciples, how to do amazing stuff, but it can just feel completely overwhelming. So how do we do it? And I've been around speaking and doing stuff and been involved in all sorts of things over 30 years and sort of been to most things. And I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And then this little mantra when I was praying, and I think God really spoke to me, and he just said 3 really simple things. And he said, start small, create some space, and think differently. My wife wants me to get them tattooed on my arm so I don't forget. Start small, create space, think differently. And I start thinking, what does that actually look like and why is it so important? And I think that sometimes we live in a culture that always craves the big and the spectacular, don't we? You may know my friend, the Reverend Les Isaac. Les Isaac he used to head up street pastors and Ascension Trust. He mentored me for many, many years. And I remember him saying sometimes he gets frustrated because he feels like there's a pressure in the church to always do big events. He said sometimes what we do is we do a big event. It takes 2 years of thinking about it. It takes 2 years planning. It costs about £2 million. And then it takes us about 2 years to recover. And then we spend another 2 years going, should we do that again? But sometimes maybe it's the start small, and Zechariah 4 verse 10, do not despise the beginning of small things. The Lord rejoices to see the work. Micah 5 verse 2, Jesus is born to the smallest of Judah's tribes. Richard Rohr talks about the remnant in the Old Testament, and he describes it like this, which I think is a really nice phrase. He said, the remnant in the Old Testament was the few that got it. I want to be a part of the few that got it. I want to be part of the few that got it. Matthew 18 verse 20, when there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, I am with them. Gideon goes from 32,000 men to 300 men. And yet we just live in a place of overwhelm. There's a little quote that I like to give people. It's coming up on the screen here. It says, note to self, when feeling overwhelmed, remember this. 1 thought at a time, 1 task at a time, 1 day at a time. I don't want us to be leaders that don't disciple others and can't engage with God because we're totally and utterly exhausted. And then we have to ask ourselves, how do we measure success? Because a lot of the times we measure success by numbers. There's a brilliant book by Arthur Brooks called Strength to Strength. I don't know if you heard of it. And he talks about the fact that in the West, success looks like avoiding losses, accumulating more stuff, more money, more accomplishments, more prestige. In the East, it's about having less. It's about living more simply, being present in what we're doing. I love this next quote. If you think you're too small to make a difference, you haven't spent the night with a mosquito. sometimes we have to start small. Then Jesus told him another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and he planted in the field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it's the largest garden plant and becomes a tree. So the birds can come and perch in its branches. Small interactions, micro connections, so important. One of the favorite things that I preach on a Sunday morning, if you've heard me preach on Sunday morning, you may have heard me preach on this because I do preach on it a lot, is the road to Emmaus. I love the fact that the day after Jesus' resurrection, that Jesus chooses to spend half the day walking with two heartbroken, anxious, probably depressed, probably frustrated. Life hasn't worked out the way they thought it was going to, like life doesn't sometimes, who knows that? If a marketing guy had come up to Jesus at that point, he probably would have gone, Jesus, what we really need now is a feeding of the 5,000. Throw in some chicken and we'll all be happy. What we really need now is a sermon on the mount. That's what we need. But you know what? Jesus walks alongside. He prioritizes the small. He prioritizes that walk. And that's what discipleship is, right? It's about coming alongside. May you always be covered in the dust of your rabbi is the famous thing that the Jewish scholars, I'm sure people have said that throughout the last couple of days. That's what it's about. And the other thing I find fascinating about that whole story is Jesus listens to these two guys. And at not one point does he interrupt and goes, guys, it's all good. I'm Jesus. Ta-da, all good. He doesn't do that. He listens. And then when he starts talking, he starts telling a bigger story. He starts telling the story of God invading the world through the prophets of the Old Testament. And he takes them right through. And then, of course, they get to Emmaus. And what I find fascinating about when they get to Emmaus is that they persuade Jesus to stay for dinner. Jesus was going to go on. What's all that about? The big reveal hasn't happened yet. Was Jesus going to leave them hanging? I don't know. You theologians can probably tell me what the right answer is. But then Jesus breaks bread. And I like to think that maybe brokenness reveals who Jesus is. And suddenly they see it and everything changes. I just want to challenge us. Sometimes are we distracted by the big? Now, if our minds are constantly going into fight, flight, or freeze mode, that's often what happens when we try and bring big changes into our lives. Now, this little diagram here is a picture of your brain. Right in the middle of your brain, you'll have this thing called the amygdala, which is where your fight, flight, or freeze mechanism is. If that's constantly going off, that means you're probably in a place where you're feeling pretty stressed most of the time. And it's really hard to lead, but you keep doing it. You're winning the battle, but you're losing the war. And what the experts are saying is to make significant change, you make small changes. So what happens is you creep around your amygdala. And if the small changes become consistent enough, they become sustainable. And that actually means that you find yourself in a better place. And sometimes I say to people, struggling with their mental health, I'm like, what's the one win that you can do today? What's the one win? Parents come up to me a lot. They buy the book for their kids, because their kids are struggling and they complain about their kids. And I'm like, what's the one thing they did well today? Maybe you could talk to them about the one thing and see how your relationship with them changes. The one thing. What's the one thing that we can do that's going to make a change? The experts on happiness say there are 4 things that guarantee happiness. This is rocket science. Check this out. 3 things. You write down 3 things that you're grateful for every single day because it gets it out of one part of your brain into another. If you don't write it down, it doesn't work the same way. You've got to write it down. Number 2, unfortunately, we can't get rid of the whole exercise thing. We have to do it. Meditation, actually really just being in the moment. We spend so much time in the past. We spend so much time worrying about the future. I often say, I think there's a new song by Blessing Offer that says, you only have the place where your feet are. That's the only thing we can worry about is where your feet are right now. Can we be in the moment? How many of us, while we've been here, have been checking emails and text messages and this and that? Because we're busy, right? That's what leaders do. You can always check out leaders of organizations. They're always on the back on their laptops or on their phones because we're rubbish at being in the moment. Our brains aren't wired that way at all. I love this quote. This is a great quote. The planet doesn't need more successful people. The planet needs more peacemakers, healers, restorers, and storytellers and lovers of every kind. in these people who live well in their places, in these people of moral courage, willing to join the fight, to join the world, to make the world more humane. And these qualities have little to do with success as we have defined it. We've got to start small. We've got to create space. You know, these verses are very familiar to many of us. Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30. Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. You notice it doesn't say, come to me and I'll make you feel guilty that you're not praying enough. Come to me and I'll send you on a discipleship course. Come to me and I'll tell you to pray more and have more faith. You know, it's about intimacy with Jesus, right? This whole thing is about being in the vine. It's about the presence of Jesus makes the difference. You know, those verses in Exodus 33, verse 15, have sort of become the cry of my last year of my life. God, if your presence doesn't go with us, I don't want to go. I'm bored, I'm tired with all the strategies of growth, all the latest theories. I just need your presence because it's your presence that makes the difference. You know, when Jesus was driven into the wilderness, it was interesting. Who drove Jesus into the wilderness? The Holy Spirit, isn't it? It's the Holy Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness because the wilderness always deals with our issues, doesn't it? And it was that space. And even though the temptations, you know, the temptations of Christ, number one, be relevant, turn stones into loaves, be spectacular, throw yourself down, be powerful, and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. But actually, it's the space that we need to realize that he's God and I'm not. You know, Samuel Wells talks about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he said it's really interesting that when we hear the parable of the Good Samaritan in the West, and when we act it out in our Sunday school classes, we are always the Good Samaritan. We are always the hero. When you hear it in the East, they say that Jesus is always the Good Samaritan. Jesus is always the hero, and we're the beggar at the side of the road that needs redemption and restoration. We're the ones that humble ourselves and say, God, we need you. It's really interesting. At the start of the year, I wrote this in my journal. I think one of the most beautiful things we can do is to create space. A space for questions, a space for doubts, creativity, vulnerability, honesty, and authenticity. A space where people could be seen, valued, and heard. A non-judgmental space where the first thought is to love and not to fix. Could I do this for myself? And how can I help create space for others? If we're going to disciple, if we're going to be discipled ourselves, we have to create space. There's no shortcut around it. And yet, it's so hard. Now, at this little interval of my talk, I thought I'd ask you an honest question, just to get a bit of feedback here. And I've written a book called Honesty Over Silence, so I expect an honest answer. I know many of you are leaders, and this may make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but will you give me an honest answer? Thanks for that overwhelming response. People now starting to feel sweat a little bit. So the question I have for you is, who here has ever, and I want a big arm in the air if this is true, who here has ever been on a speed awareness course? Please, just look at the amount of hands that are around the room. Oh my goodness, I think that's one of the biggest responses that I've ever had. Flipping, keep your hands high. The only time I had a bigger response was when I was doing a clergy meeting. Hands high, please don't take them down. Don't think you've got off that lightly. Please keep your hand up if you've been on 2 speed awareness courses. Wow, there's some very dangerous people at the back there. Shall we go for 3 speed awareness courses? Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we have a guy here. What do you do, sir? What's your job? What was that? Brilliant stuff. Avoid this guy at the end. If he's got his car, just go the other direction. But the reality is, it's not sustainable. Psalm 23, we all know it. Just listen to it again. The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. What? Why does God have to make me lay down in green pastures? Bit harsh, but we need it. Guys, we're not the hero. We're not the fixer. We need Jesus. And when I started thinking about this, I was like, I need to create space. What do I need to create space for? And I started thinking, I need to create space for doubt. You haven't misheard me. And I need to create space for doubt when I just assume the first thought that comes into my mind is true. Because actually, normally, the first thought that comes into my mind about myself is really negative. Because we are our own biggest critic and we self-sabotage all the time. I find it, and then I just beat myself up all day. And particularly as a leader, if I lose it with my kids, that I do occasionally, I'll go up to Daniel, my son, he's 20 now, and I'll say, Daniel, I'm really sorry, mate, that I lost it with you. And he'll be like, it's fine, Dad, it's fine, isn't it? And then the next day I'll go back to him, I go, Dad, Daniel, I'm really sorry I lost it with you yesterday. I'll be like, Dad, it's calm, innit? It's calm, which means it's okay. But that thought, I'm a rubbish dad. I'm a rubbish dad. It goes into my head. And sometimes we need to use doubt in a positive way. The guys who flew the planes into the Twin Towers, they didn't have any doubt. They were convinced that they were doing the right thing for their faith. Certain people really scare me. Sometimes it's really healthy to have a bit of doubt. Let's doubt our inner critic. It's interesting. My son said to me once, Dad, why do you bully yourself so much? I was like, what? He's 13. And he goes, like, sometimes you could speak really negatively about yourself. And you told me that bullies were bad. And he's right. I went to therapy and my therapist said to me, Patrick, how do you show yourself self-compassion? And I said, don't be stupid, I'm a bloke. I don't do baths and I don't do candles. And she just rolled her eyes. Look, and this is going to be really hard work. And she said, you know what? Here's the thing. Self-compassion isn't self-indulgence. It's not the extra glass of wine to take the edge off. It's not the extra bit of chocolate cake. Those things might be nice, but actually they often make you feel guilty in the long run. Self-compassion isn't self-pity when you make a drama out of everything and it's all about you. Self-compassion is not self-esteem. Self-esteem can come from external values about what other people say about us. Self-compassion is such a powerful thing because it comes from internal. It's an internal thing. So, I know that this talk isn't perfect. I'm doing my best, but it won't be perfect. But maybe no matter what anyone says to me at the end, which may or may not build my self-esteem, I could show myself some compassion for turning up, for showing up and putting myself out there. Self-compassion is this. I like this definition. It's talking to yourself the way you would talk to your best friend. Because you wouldn't dream of talking to your best friend the way you talk to yourself. I hear that verse, love God, love your neighbor as yourself, preached on so many times. And the loving yourself bit, I normally, 9 times out of 10, is missed out. And it's not about being selfish. It's about how do we show ourselves that compassion that Christ shows us. I found this really, really challenging. If you don't get challenged by me, then please get challenged by this. This is the top 5 regrets of the dying. The top 5 regrets of the dying is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I stayed in touch with my friends. I wish that I let myself be happier. We've got to create space. And then lastly, we need to think differently. I love this photograph. I think it's brilliant. Are we looking at the wrong thing? Are we missing out on what God is really trying to do and say? Brené Brown says this, and a lot of you will relate to this as leaders. Everyone talks about transformation, but no one wants to change. Jesus was constantly challenging people's perception of what a Messiah should be. A lot of theologians describe the Sermon on the Mount as the great role reversal. And guys, change is coming. And sometimes we have to embrace some of that change. And some of the things that may have served us well in the past. I often think about Saul putting on David's armor, his armor onto David. and go, this is the way we did it in the past. You wear my armor and you go and fight the giant. David hasn't got Saul's anointing. David is about thinking differently. It's about, how do I do this differently? He saw a power imbalance in Goliath and he did what he knew. He did what he knew. He knew how to throw rocks and he knew how to defend himself. He did what he knew and he did it for the glory of God. And I'm so challenged that we need to do this more and more. Who remembers the BlackBerry? Did anyone ever have a BlackBerry? But yeah, you know, there's tiny little keys. And there's a famous story about the founder of the BlackBerry, Mike Lazarus. And basically they went up to him and they said, we need to change. And he was like, I ain't changing. All the celebrities have a BlackBerry. Everyone has a BlackBerry. Similar people went up to Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs had the iPod. Who remembers the iPod? That tiny little square, which was very, very easy to lose. And they're like, we need to change. Steve Jobs didn't want to change. He liked his iPod. But instead, the difference between Steve Jobs and Mike Lazarus is he said, go and do your research and come back to me. So his team came back and they'd done all the research. They talked about values. They talked about continuity. But he said, our identity will endure, but our strategy has to change. And so he changed it. Steve Jobs said, I don't think tapping on glass will ever catch on. Today, the Apple phone accounts for almost half of Apple's revenue, billions of pounds, because he started to think differently. I've been so challenged about this as a leader. Phil Wall, who some of you may remember from back in the day, worked for the Sally Army. He said this, which I thought was really challenging. One of the biggest tragedies of the church in recent times is the professionalization of the priesthood. It's turned the church into consumers where we expect everything to be done for us. I think sometimes we have this very dual way of thinking. Those who are in ministry and those who aren't. Very binary, you know, you're either in or you're out. It's either black or it's white. People that read this newspaper automatically think this. And we know that life is far more complex than that. We judge each other very, very, very quickly. I was on a leadership team of quite a large festival in the UK, and we were doing one of these spreadsheets where you decide who's going to speak at each seminar. And there were literally about 7 different Christian speakers all wanting to speak at the same seminar. And I really felt challenged by God going, Patrick, what would it look like for you to take your communication and to communicate it outside of the Christian bubble? Not completely, because I know you love the church and you love speaking at the church, but maybe, you know, half of your time, 60% of your time, take it outside of the Christian bubble. And I was like, I can't, I'm trapped. I can't do it. I've got, you know, I'm the CEO, I've got responsibilities. You know, we'd started this charity called Kintsugi Hope a year before COVID, and which was all around mental and emotional health. During COVID, it grew by 455% in a year. It was crazy. It wasn't great for my mental health, not alone anyone else's mental health. It just went through the roof. You know, we ended up with like 1,500 leaders, hundreds of churches, because the need was so huge. And I was like, I can't do anything else. And I felt really, really challenged. And as the thing grew and it got so bigger, I didn't enjoy it anymore. I don't enjoy HR issues. I don't enjoy writing fundraising forms. I can do it just about, but it doesn't bring me life. And I said to my wife, but I'm trapped here again. Because when you grow organizations, you know, you go through all these different phases, and then the thing you're passionate about, you don't do anymore. And she said, what did God say to you? I was like, start small, create space, think differently. This got really challenged. She goes, we should downsize. I was like, no, I don't think we need to go that far. God wasn't that. No, we should downsize. Let's downsize. Let's get rid of most of our bills and let you do the thing that you're most passionate about, communicating outside of the Christian bubble. And we did. And you know, in the last year, I came from the NHS this morning. I've spoken in more prisons, businesses. I've spoken to thousands of non-Christians. I've spoken to more people in the last year who aren't Christians than I've done in the 20 years previous. And it's just because we started small, we created space, and we started thinking about ministry and discipleship differently. So it bursts out of the 4 walls of the church. You know, I was at this one event and this guy came up to me and it was a Christian leaders breakfast. You know, you do these things. And he was boasting about all the famous Christians who were going to speak there over the next year. If that would impress me, I was like, great, how boring. And then he was boasting that he knew the manager of the hotel. So I said to him, mate, you know what we should do next time? And he was like, what should we do next time? I go, you should talk to the manager of the hotel because I've seen how hard the cleaners work. The cleaners are here at 5:30 in the morning. Wouldn't it be amazing, instead of this with all the church leaders, because they get this quite a lot, nothing against it, but we got all the cleaners together and we did something about holistic well-being and mental, emotional, spiritual health. We have the most fascinating conversations about faith on the way. And he was like, I've never had a Christian speaker ask that before. But you know what? We need to think differently. We need to think differently. We need to let go of our egos. We need to let go of our inner critic. We need to start small, create space, and think differently. I want to show you this little video because I think it just sums up all the things that I'm trying to say and maybe not saying articulately as I want to. But it's from Charlie Mackessy's book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. Everyone's seen the book. It's sold millions, hasn't it? Millions and millions and millions. Been translated into so many different languages, won an Oscar, won a BAFTA. But the fascinating thing is some of the backstory to it. You know, Charlie Mackesy, who done that amazing artwork as well, I believe, was really good friends with a guy called Bear Grylls, who you probably heard of. And they had a conversation and said to Bear Grylls, what's the bravest thing that you've ever done? Bear Grylls has climbed Everest twice. He swam in rivers with crocodiles and slept in jungles. Bear Grylls replied, the bravest thing that I've ever done is say the word help. And then the four characters that as you unpack the characters, and you know, there's been a lot of psychology around it, the four characters represent different parts of us. The boy represents the part of us that's really inquisitive. We've got lots of questions. The mole represents the part of us that's enthusiastic, but a little bit greedy. We just want more cake. The fox represents the part of us that actually has been hurt in the past. So if you notice, always follows behind because we're really scared of being hurt again. And then the horse represents the strongest part of us. It's like our soul, our spirit. You can do this. I will talk to your inner critic. Just watch this, and then we're going to pray.
I think you believe in me more than I do.
You'll catch up. Life is difficult, but you are loved.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Kind. The fox never really speaks.
I often feel I've nothing interesting to say. Being honest is always interesting.
It was heaven a moment ago. Oh, I had it almost. We had it almost.
What's the bravest thing
asking for help isn't giving up. It's refusing to give up. I can fly. But I stopped because it made the other horses jealous.
Well, we love you. Whether you can fly or not.
Always remember, you're enough, just as you are.
The big things feel out of control. Focus on what you know this storm will pass.
That's why we're here. Isn't it?
For cake.
To love. And be loved.
You know, sometimes your mind plays tricks on you. It can tell you you're no good, that it's all hopeless. But I've discovered this. You are loved and important, and you bring to this world things that no one else can. So hold on.
You are loved and important, and you bring things to this world that no one else can. I used to have a PA called Ludovine. She was French. In fact, she's still French. But she listens to my talks and she said, Patrick, I've come up with a word for you. And I was like, what's that, Ludovine? She said, flawsome. I was like, what does that mean? She went, an individual who knows their flaws but knows they're awesome regardless. I was like, I quite like that. An individual who knows their flaws but knows they're awesome regardless. You know, a few years ago now, or quite a few years ago, we had a visit from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He came to visit one of our charities, and I had this little one-on-one time with him, and he turned to me and he said something, and I've repeated this story. It's a lot longer when I normally tell it. But I said that Desmond Tutu turned to me and said, Patrick, XLP, which was the charity I was the CEO and founder of at the time, makes God smile. In fact, I said that in front of 5,000 people at a conference once. I lied, thinking, I don't know why you've invited this guy to speak. What Desmond Tutu actually said to me was, Patrick, you make God smile. But it's always about the charity, right? It's always about the ministry. So I couldn't accept that. But guys, if there's anything that you remember from this tiny little talk as you leave this place, it's got to be that you make God smile. You really do. You're loving, you're serving, you've given up your time to be here because you're grappling with what does it mean to disciple myself, to disciple others. And when we're in the storm, I don't know. I think the only thing actually, I don't think it's rocket science. It's constantly coming back to that fact we know that we make God smile.